Welcome to Sum of Your Parts podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Betsy Greenleaf, premier pelvic health expert and women's wellness warrior. We'll be discussing women's health topics and how you're greater than the sum of your parts.
Welcome to the first podcast of the new year 2020. It's interesting that New Year's resolutions have been tracked back to the ancient Babylonians about 4,000 years ago. This tradition has carried on where people make amends for their past mistakes and vow to improve themselves in the future. So what better way to start our New Year's resolution and the new year with discussing food addiction? Today we will be discussing food addiction with Dr. Joan Ifland. Dr. Ifland has been creating breakthroughs in the recovery from food addiction since 1999. She was the first to publish a textbook on this subject called Processed Food Addictions, Foundations, Assessment, and Recovery. She is a fellow of the American College of Nutrition and earned her PhD in Addictive Nutrition at the Union Institute and University in 2010, her MBA at Stanford in 1978, and her BA in Economics and Political Science at Oberlin College in 1974. She was selected by the Oprah Winfrey Network as the food addiction specialist on the Book of John Gray. She has innovated in online services such as the Addiction Reset community, which she started in 2016, and that can be found at www.foodaddictionreset.com. She's also founded sites which provide free services, including a Facebook group, food addiction education, and handouts that you can find at foodaddictionresources.com. Reset Week is the first online live video program for withdrawal from processed foods that she began in 2018. She also had a meal prep manual that has a breakthrough system to easily manage meals, which resolves a major barrier to recovery from food addiction. She's the lead author for the first scholarly publication describing the refined food addiction and the definition of addictive foods. So I'm excited because we will be discussing today what is addiction to processed foods, how does it happen, what are the similarities between processed food industry and the tobacco industry, and how do we prevent and recover from our processed food addiction? Join me today in welcoming Dr. Joan Ifland.
It's 1996, so 24 years ago, and I had a miserable personality. I was a rager, and I would flip into raging without, just even making a decision about it. It just would come over me. I had two beautiful daughters and a nice husband, and I was doing all these things to try to get that raging to stop. I was doing therapy, I was doing women's groups, I was doing 12-step groups. But in one of the groups, nothing was working. And I was working those programs hard. I was doing everything they told me to do, but still I would just erupt into this rage. So one of the people in one of those groups said to me, why don't you try giving up sugars and flours? And I was a yo-yo dieter, and I happened to be at a thin stage, and I'm like, why are you telling me that? But at the end of the year, of course, I had regained the weight, which is what yo-yo dieting is about. And I went and got the book that she recommended, and I eliminated sugars and flours from my diet. I knew that this food plan was not going to work for weight loss because there was way too much food on it. But on day 4, weird and wonderful things started happening. Brain fog cleared. I didn't know I had brain fog. It had just kind of come in so gradually. My energy came up. I did notice that I was waking up tired. I was waking up wanting to go back to sleep every day and taking naps. And I thought it was just because I had 2 kids. And the other thing that happened was my cravings stopped. So I have had cravings my entire life. I didn't know I had cravings because I can remember going to kindergarten and just wanting to learn how to tell time so I would know when the snack was coming.
Wow.
I was hungry and craving even in kindergarten.
Wow.
So that stopped January 4th, 1996. I had no idea that you could make that stop. And so I think that's such a good point, because often when I'm talking to people about giving up sugars and flours, I can see what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Thinking is, if I don't have access to sugars and flours, I will be stuck with these cravings, and it'll just be agony because I won't be able to do anything to make them stop. And of course, that's not true. It's about a 4-day withdrawal. And at the end of those 4 days, typically, sometimes it can take as long as 8 days or 10 days. Typically, at the end of 4 days, the cravings stop. And people are shocked and they are so happy. So the culture has been able to make a lot of these eating experiences about weight gain, weight loss. But what people really appreciate is the release from the obsession, the release from the cravings. So I started out immediately. Of course, I wanted everybody else to enjoy this. I made up a handout of the foods that you can eat. And it didn't work. Like, nobody did it. I started feeding my children this way, and their grades went up, and their popularity went up, and their sports activities went up. They were just amazing. I told all the other mothers in my kids' school about it, and like nobody could start it. So I thought, oh, well, maybe they need a book to tell them how to do it. So I wrote a book, and it was great. I got the attention of some, like the PBS producer in Houston did some work on it, and I went around and I gave talks, and the book was climbing, and it stayed in the top 3% of Amazon books for like 10 years.
Wow, that's great.
But it did not start a movement. I just thought, oh, as soon as people find out about this, they're going to want to do it, and they'll just change. So at one point, I was being considered to go on one of the big New York morning shows. And I went through like 5 producer interviews. I was at the airport ready to fly overnight and be there at 5 o'clock. And the last producer came on and said, no, we cannot use you. You don't have a degree in your field. I had this nice, big, fancy MBA from Stanford, and I had my undergraduate degree in economics and political science, but I didn't have a nutrition degree. So I went back to school and I got my PhD at a school for new fields. It's called Union Institute and University in Cincinnati. And I got a PhD in addictive nutrition.
Oh my goodness.
But wow, now I can teach the teachers. And I started writing academic papers and writing chapters for other books. And it didn't have any impact at all. People still didn't believe in food addiction, and they weren't able to get started on it. So then I thought, well, you know what? I'll just give them the food. And I started a prepared meal company. I didn't have any idea how to run a company like that. I got something very valuable out of it, which is people, like really high-end challenged people. Like we had this one law firm that was a client, very high-end, cream top, just the top of the top people worked there, and they had a good reaction. So I talked to them at the end of the first week, and they're like, well, I seem to have fewer cravings, and I seem to be able to think more clearly, and I seem to not be having that mid-morning, mid-afternoon, mid-evening slump. And I'm like, oh my goodness, these processed foods really must be affecting people all throughout the culture.
Yeah.
So that was a very valuable thing to get out of that. And then I was approached by a big textbook company to write the textbook, which is here. So we now have a textbook. I sat for 3 years and just looked at the research. I wrote about 70% of it, and then really great scientists contributed the other 30%. And I got 2 really hot academics from my doctoral committee to co-edit with me. So now we have the textbook. And in the course of writing the textbook, I saw why everything I had tried had not worked. It's because processed food addiction is a serious addiction. The amount of kind of programming that has happened in the brain is at the high end of severity of addiction. And I thought, oh, well, then you have got to retrain the brain not to crave. And you've got to build up the recovery, sort of sensible part of the brain, the braking system. You've got to build up that part of the brain until it is strong enough to keep control of the behavior center. So what has happened is the cravings are so intense that they literally can send enough signaling over to the behavior center to control behavior. So what you want to do is you want to stimulate control and braking and rational thought and no, I don't want to eat that. You've got to stimulate that part of the brain until those neurons are firing so strongly, and they're firing more strongly than the craving part of the brain, then they will have control over the behavior center. And then you get control over your food. So that's what I started. We're on Zoom right now. I know this is also being recorded for audio, but in January of 2018, right as the textbook was coming out, I learned about Zoom. And what Zoom, the importance of Zoom is that when you have eye-to-eye contact with somebody, you're much more likely to copy what they do. So the part of the brain that really thinks rationally is overwhelmed by the craving brain. The craving brain is a part of the brain that's about 3 million years old. The neocortex, the new brain, the rational part of the brain, is only about 140,000 years old. And then you have the very primitive survival part of the brain, which is about 7 million years old. So craving is always going to beat frontal lobe. But there's one part of the brain that will beat everything, and that is mirror neurons. And that's what I learned in those Zoom meetings. Suddenly, everybody was had control of their food, like long before they should have. And I just started researching mirror neurons. So there's nothing in the textbook about mirror neurons. But what we know is that even though the frontal lobe might be overwhelmed and you cannot think through it, mirror neurons are never overwhelmed, and you can copy somebody else. So that's where we are now. We have online services for where we have 4 live events a day, and we're getting success with people who have never had success before. And it's just a completely different approach, but it's based on writing the textbook and realizing, oh man, this is a really serious addiction. And then you know what to do. You need to retrain the brain, and you need to be around people who are already successful. Yeah, it's very exciting. It's very exciting.
It's tough though, in that, like, I was even trying to look this up because I know in my medical training, nobody ever, taught us about any of this stuff.
No.
And I think there's such a lack in like the medical literature about it. And I was trying to even look up percentages, like how many people are probably food addicted. And they basically said that nobody really knows. I've seen anywhere from 5% to the high was like 30%, but I'm sure it's even higher than that because nobody's asking the questions. Nobody's looking at it that way.
Well, the thing about this is that because I have a background in economics, at one point I got into the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, statistics about how much of different kinds of foods actually disappear into the US domestic economy. And what I found out is that Americans are consuming, on average, a pound per person per day of sugars, including high fructose corn syrup, gluten-containing flours and corn flour, high-fat dairy, and French fries.
Wow.
So when you see that volume, and these are highly addictive substances, they're not food. The body doesn't read them as food. So we have feeding cycle, feeding pathways. When the brain is exposed to food, the feeding pathways light up. Oh, food. But when the brain is exposed to processed foods, the drug addiction pathways light up. And that was really some of the strongest, earliest evidence that we're not dealing with overeating of real food. We are dealing with drug addiction. And it looks like overeating because that happens to be the method of ingesting, but it's drug addiction. These are food-like substances. They're being marketed as food, just like cigarettes were marketed as pleasure or relaxing or rebellious, but it's not food. You can see nicotine's not food and you don't need it and you can get off of it. But people are very confused about what is food versus what are these food-like substances. So once you get that deep down on the inside and also get that you didn't cause this started when the tobacco industry took over big chunks of the processed food industry, then you really get, this is cigarettes all over again. Yeah.
So the snack industry, obviously, from their point, they want to make money. So how do you make money? You get people to crave their products. And how do you get people to crave their products? Put the ingredients in there that cravings.
Yes. So when tobacco came into processed foods, they said to the processed food executives, okay, so we want a snack industry. And the food executives said, well, people really get enough at meals and they're really not hungry in between meals. And the tobacco executives just said, oh, no problem. We will create desire. It has nothing to do with hunger. We'll just, as you're saying, create cravings for it. And then there was a consultant, Howie Moskowitz, he was Harvard PhD psychology of marketing. And he created a very data intense method for figuring out how much sugar, fat, salt you could put into products before the consumer would reject them. So he maxed out incredibly, like the amount of sugar, fat, salt in products. And so the tobacco industry had a consultant who could implement their addiction business model.
I've always wondered how I could sit down, and I've done this, unfortunately, way too many times, is I could easily sit down and eat a whole container of Oreos and not feel full. And I'm like, and you look at the size and you're like, okay, that's a good amount of cookies. Like, why am I not feeling full?
Yeah. So, it's because it's not food. The fullness mechanisms, the satiation mechanisms in the body are tuned into food. But remember, the body's not reading it as food. So when you look at those numbers, how much disappears into the U.S. economy, everybody's got this. Yeah. And then, you think about my little story about the highest functioning people in one of the top law firms in the country have this. It is impairing their functioning. Then everybody's got this. And the criteria that I use are the alcoholism criteria for diagnosing addictions, diagnosing alcoholism. And one of those criteria is cravings. If you ask anybody, really, they will tell you they're thinking about food between meals. Another one is eating in spite of knowledge of consequences.
Yeah.
You have 70% of the country which is overweight or obese. Those people are eating all the time with knowledge of consequences and unable to stop themselves. And then you look, one of the other criteria is unintended use, where you're going to just have one out of that box and you end up eating the box.
That's me.
Or you wake up, I am going to eat healthy today. By 10 o'clock, you're eating something you didn't want to eat. Or I'm going to drive straight home, but your car just kind of turns itself into a fast food place. So that's 3 criteria. And then the other one is a failure to cut back. And you just look at the success of dieting and weight loss, it's non-existent. So those are 4 out of the 11 criteria. Most people will also experience eating more than they used to, and they will experience eating for reasons other than hunger, like they have a headache, or they're irritable, or they're tired. Well, that's not food use, that's drug use, and it can be interpreted as withdrawal avoidance. Because when you get into withdrawal, you can experience irritability, headache, fatigue, all those things. So if you're reaching for a food or drink for those reasons, that's withdrawal avoidance. Now that's 6 behaviors. 6. That's 6 out of 11, and that meets the American Psychiatric Association criteria for a severe addiction.
Wow. That's
And really,
because I think I just hit all 6 of those.
Yes, most people do. Most people do. And again, this is anecdotal, but I was invited to give a talk at a Rotary Club. I said, sure, why not? I'm going to take these 11 criteria, and then people will be able to kind of self-quiz. It's not a diagnosis, but self-quiz and see if they have a problem. There are 22 people in the room, and 11 out of the 22 diagnosed as severe, self-quizzed as severe, and everybody else except 1 self-quizzed as mildly or moderately addicted. And so it's all very consistent. The amount of product, the amount of processed foods that people are eating, and then you look at how addictive these substances are. Researchers are beginning to hone in on these kinds of questions. So one researcher had a group of rats, and the question was, how long does it take before the brain starts adjusting addictively to sugar? So they fed this group of rats a 30% sugar solution, and they sacrificed a few of them every day, and they watched. It only took 7 days.
Wow.
And the first adaptation was to hyperactivate this, it's called a locomotion center. So the first thing that the addiction did was make sure that it could get the person to go and get the stuff. It's very creepy. It's just
I know.
creepy.
It's like the sugar's like controlling our bodies and we're not doing it ourselves. That is really scary.
Like, the stuff that we're doing ourselves is in this frontal lobe, but this is all happening in the limbic system, which is a much more powerful and ancient brain, part of the brain in the front.
I'm thinking back, and now that everything you're telling me and the stuff I've read on your website, and I started, like I said, it was very eye-opening. I was like, oh my God, this is what's been going on with me for years, because I was doing so well. I was eating healthy, and then at the end of the year, the holidays start popping up, and I didn't have any of the bad foods in my house because I'm lazy and I won't go out and get it.
Good.
It's not already here.
Good.
But then what happened is, holidays come into the year, and it's like I decided we were going to make cookies with the family. We made the Christmas cookies. And it was the cookies triggered me, and it's been now probably a good couple weeks because I ate the first batch of cookies. So then I had to make more for actual Christmas.
Yes, exactly.
The other day, because then everybody, you start making excuses like, it's the end of the year, New Year's is coming up, I'm just gonna eat all this stuff until New Year's, and then at New Year's I'll give it up. Like I'd sit there and be like, I'd eat a cookie, and I'd be like, okay, all right, I know we should stop at 1, but all right, I gotta make an excuse to go get another one.
Yes.
And then it's like, okay, now I feel really bad that I had to. Well, I already screwed up. Let me keep going.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I feel bad. So to make myself feel better, I'm just going to reward myself with another. And then it's like 20 cookies later.
That's excellent. That's just an excellent example. That's criteria number 1, unintended use.
Yeah.
Or criteria number, is it 10? 9, use in spite of knowledge of consequences.
Yeah.
So there you have 2 of those addictive behaviors, and 2, I believe, does meet the threshold for a moderate addiction.
So it sounds like, I can't even think of anybody that I know that's probably not addicted to foods.
Right.
Thinking, talking to my girlfriends, what do? We go out and we eat, and we're like, and when we're together, that's the excuse. Oh, we're together socially, so let's eat the fries and the cookies and the cakes and the, And so how do you stop the madness?
Okay, so there's really 2 pieces. One is sheer education.
Yeah.
Okay, what's addictive and what's not? Because the processed food industry, really tobacco, when they came into processed foods, so a loaf of bread in, say, 1980 was a loaf of bread. By 1990, that loaf of bread looks the same from the outside. It is now loaded with sugar, fat, salt.
Wow.
So the processed food industry picked up and absorbed the tobacco addiction model. And we know the tobacco industry, for example, extracted and concentrated nicotine, highly addictive, and put it back into cigarettes. So they're just following the addiction business model. And so we continued to buy the bread. We didn't know.
Yeah.
And became addicted. So you got to remember the power of these corporations to addict. American adults, 2/3 of American adults smoked.
Yeah.
So the tobacco industry had this highly developed method for surrounding people with cues. Because an addiction is an externally cued disease. That means there's some kind of reminder or stimulation or trigger that hyperactivates the limbic system. This is dopamine, serotonin, endocannabinoids, opiates. Hyperactivates those neurons to start pumping out their neurotransmitter, which then gets over here and controls the behavior center. So tobacco knew how to do that really well. You couldn't go anywhere without being exposed to a tobacco trigger. If you went to a restaurant, there was the cigarette machine at the entrance or by the restroom. If you went to a sporting event, there was the cigarette ads around the perimeter of the whatever arena you were at. You turned on television, there were cigarette ads. You went to work, you went to a workplace, people were smoking. You went to a school, the teachers were in the teacher's lounge smoking. That teacher came out of that teacher's lounge and smelled like smoke. And the cigarette companies tried very hard to market to 10-year-old boys with the Joe Cool Camel campaign. So they distributed things like book covers with their logos on it. The Marlboro Man had a kind of a giveaway program where if you turned in so many, I don't know what it was, evidence of purchase, you could get a Marlboro Man jacket. So all the logoed goods, you were constantly being triggered into craving. So external cueing. And what R.J. Reynolds, the big tobacco company R.J. Reynolds did in 1963 is they bought Hawaiian Punch. Mm. And what they did, this is a paper that came out this year by a great group of researchers at University of California, San Francisco. they took their cigarette marketing technology and they transferred it to sugary drinks for children. So this Hawaiian Punch had a mascot, Punchy, and Punchy was everywhere. So they had the same kind of giveaway program. You could get all the things in your house could have Punchy on them. And of course, the grocery store and the fast food companies are doing things like giving teachers whole packets of McDonald's coupons. So the kids will be surrounded by McDonald's triggers. Even at school, they're being constantly bombarded by, reminders to use that highly addictive food. So it's kind of like, so the first thing to do is to figure out where you're being exposed to cues. Get the television turned off.
Yeah.
Get out your great board games, get out the cards, get out the craft projects. Just get that television turned off and spend the evening doing things that actually strengthen the frontal lobe. Television actually weakens the frontal lobe. So cueing in the home, get the processed foods out of the house, create like a safe haven, a refuge at home. I've had this experience, like I've been out around cueing too long and I'm starting to think, well, maybe I'll just stop this once and get da-da-da. And then my frontal lobe is strong enough and my mirror neurons are strong enough that they're just like, get home, just go home, run for home, because home is safe.
Yeah.
Home is totally cued for, oh my goodness, of course we don't eat that toxic stuff. So if I just get home and I get in my sanctuary, I know that the cravings will stop and the rational thinking will come back. Cueing. Now, the other piece is education. And we do have a website with free handouts. It's called Food Addiction Resources. And you can find the list of excluded foods and the list of unprocessed foods there. And you can start just slowly thinking about and becoming aware of where you're being exposed to these processed foods and how you're going to get unprocessed foods into your household without being triggered in the process. And so all these, it's kind of ironic, but all of these places that have now immobilized people because processed foods attack cartilage in the joints. So people are immobile because they're tired, they're depressed, they've got an extra 100 pounds on them, their joints hurt. They can't get to the grocery store anymore. So all these grocery stores are now offering online ordering.
Oh.
And that is the way to go. That is the way to go. The amount of cueing, temptation, cravings that are reduced just by not going into the grocery store 1 hour a week or even 20 minutes a week is incredible. Just the amount of control you have by not getting those craving neurons all excited once a week is pretty amazing. It's well worth it. I know it's more expensive. It's well worth it because whatever you spend getting that delivery or even getting somebody to shop for you and going to the parking lot to pick it up, you will save in impulse purchases.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Now, I do want to mention one other thing, which is that we are so tough because we do all these good things. We get the stuff out of our house. We train our household members in what to eat, what not to eat. We really celebrate all these incredible improvements in health, outlook, mood, behavior. I mean, it's just like you feel like you're winning the lottery every day. But those mirror neurons just keep going. And mirror neurons, you go to your workplace, everybody else is eating it. Mirror neurons are like, oh, we should be eating this. Because mirror neurons are the reason we survived. In primitive times, people needed to be in a tribe because somebody in that tribe knew when and where to look for food, when and where to find shelter, when and where to hunt, when and where to procreate, to protect new babies and deliver new babies. That was all in the tribe. If you were in a tribe, you would live and you would procreate. If you were not in a tribe, you would die. A predator would get you, or the elements would get you, or you would starve. So mirror neurons are like, what is the tribe doing? We're doing that for sure. And it's more powerful. It runs the whole rest of the brain. Mirror neurons do. So a lot of times people beat themselves up because they're not doing well. And it's just because they're around people who are using processed foods. We're helplessly controlled by mirror neurons. So that's why we created the Addiction Reset Community, the ARC. And we have 3 hours of Zoom chats, live Zoom chats a day, and then 1 hour of conference call, which we record. So audible mirror neuron stimulation is in the research. It does happen, not as powerful as visual, but still works. So we have like libraries full of these recorded conference calls that people can turn on anytime. Why is this so important? Because we are under a barrage of constant food cueing. And once that part of the brain becomes active, then we are in danger of lapsing and then getting into the cycle of, while I'm here, I'll just eat the rest of the box. So you want to turn that center down, and you want to turn up the recovery center. And you can do that by listening to recordings. We also have a big YouTube channel, a lot of videos. I did like this TV program 1 year. And so we have all the videos from that. There are lots of them. And just watching somebody speak common sense or speak the science, that can be very helpful in stopping a craving. And that's free. That YouTube channel, it's Food Addiction Reset TV. And you just go to YouTube and search for it.
That's great. I was starting to think with the mirroring, and then now I'm starting to feel like really guilty because, before I had kids, I was like, I'm never letting my kids have candy and this and that. And, you start off idealistic, and then, your kids go to school and all their friends are eating this stuff. So I started being like, okay, fine, you guys can have this. You can have the soda. And now I realize I've kind of created monsters because this past Halloween, our school system does this trunk or treat where we had 200 cars set up in a parking lot, and everyone decorates their cars, and the kids go from car to car to car. So they get a ridiculous amount of candy one night.
Wow.
And so I have that candy in my house right now, and I would love to throw it away, and I'm thinking I will, but my kids act like I'm like killing a family pet every time I say I'm going to throw away the candy.
Mm-hmm.
They're like,
it's a fierce addiction.
Don't get rid of my candy. And I'm like, guys, it's not the end of the world. If you want a candy, I can always go buy more candy, but they act like it's the worst thing in the world that I'm going to throw away their Halloween candy. And now I'm thinking, oh my God, that's me, because I've allowed them to kind of go down that road that I have myself with the sugar addiction.
Yeah, but be careful. Betsy, be careful how you think about this. I have allowed them. No, you didn't do that. You didn't allow them. Your mirror neurons are plugged into mainstream culture, and your mirror neurons said, what's everybody doing? They've all got candy in their house, so we're going to have candy too.
Yeah.
What I allow was like in this frontal lobe. It was not the part of the brain that was active in how candy got into your house. I'm really big on, I know how painful it is when people blame themselves for things. And then when we blame ourselves for things that we didn't cause, no, don't do that. Yeah, so don't blame yourself. You're getting this information out really for the first time. And we do have strategies for how to introduce clean eating into a household without creating a World War III. And it's a process of education. And one of the things you can do, for example, is you can take the list of unprocessed foods and sit down with your family members, make a copy for each member, and have them check off all the foods that they like. You know, hamburgers are on there, but just not the bun.
Yeah.
Do hamburgers in lettuce wraps. There's just a tremendous amount of terrific food. And then there's, we do have a course, 2 hours to 7 days of gorgeous meals, where we show people how to make all their food for the week in 2 hours. Yeah. So you start to just focus on a stream, a steady, consistent stream of clean food. I know how long it takes to fill a crock pot, like 2 minutes.
Sure.
You get a package of ground meat, put it in the crock pot, you know, put in a cup of beans, cover it with water, put in a couple of cans of tomato paste, really. And when you go in the grocery store, you don't go in the grocery store anymore, but you order those packages of cut up vegetables, dump that in, dump in some spices, literally takes 2 minutes. And here is a secret. You do that before you go to bed, because the strongest cueing in the human brain takes place in the nose. It's the only place where neurons are exposed to air. So it's not like the eyes where it has to travel back an optic nerve. Oh no, those are brain neurons picking up the smell of that crock pot.
Wow.
Now, there is one thing that the human brain is very good at signaling, which is eat what's available. So if you've got if your kids say, oh, Mom, we like chili. We like chili. Everybody likes chili. We like stew. We love your chicken stew. Or we love your beef stew. We like those things. So if you have that smell, if you're exposing your children's olfactory neurons to that smell all night, then you're signaling that brain, this is what there is to eat. This is what there is to eat. This is what there is to eat. And the brain is going to say, okay, let's eat that. So you can do these kinds of things. And I'm going to give you one other really insider tip for handling children. So what I did with my kids is I was working with a therapist at the time because I was really trying to get that raging under control. She said, this is just like smoking. She got it right away. So you don't want to enable your family and you don't want them to trigger you. So if you were trying to quit smoking, we'll say you cannot smoke in the house. You cannot ask me to go buy cigarettes or pay for them. And you can't smoke in front of me. So we took those rules over to processed foods, and it worked beautifully. First of all, they were very, very happy to cooperate because that raging did stop. And that is actually what got me going on this field 24 years ago. So they started to eat a lot more clean food. That was January, like the third week of January. My deal was I had no desire to try to control what they were doing at school because that's codependency, incredibly destructive. I am not going there. And I don't have to, because what I now know, this is what happened. So January, I started when they left the house, they had 2 snacks, they had their breakfast, they had their lunch, they had all the food that they needed so they would never have to choose between eating something bad and going hungry. They had plenty of food with them for the entire day. And then I would even have dinner in the car because we had long commutes, could be an hour home. And I didn't want them to get hungry while we were, so I'd bring dinner to school and I picked them up at 5 o'clock. So they got cleaner and cleaner. But here's what happened that really turned the corner. Come March, we had a 10-day trip planned for spring break. So for those 10 days, we were together 24 hours a day. They couldn't eat the stuff in front of me. They really finished withdrawal. And what does that mean? it means that their gut biome, the little microorganisms in the gut, there are trillions of them, that break down processed foods died off. They weren't being fed. The liver watched all this going on and said, oh, well, I don't need to stockpile enzymes to break down these toxins anymore because I'm not seeing them. So the liver stopped stockpiling those enzymes and started stockpiling enzymes that the rest of the body needed more. Okay, so the kids got back to school after those 10 days, totally cleaned out, but gut biome totally repopulated, and they tried to eat. You know, they told me this years later, they tried to eat the cinnamon roll for breakfast. And they were sick. They couldn't keep their eyes open. They were nauseated. They were so irritable. Nobody wanted to be around them. They couldn't concentrate. They were in trouble with the teachers. And they just gave it up. I never fought with my children about food. People are very afraid. They're just going to say, no, I'm not fighting that battle. Absolutely not. Don't ever, ever, ever fight with anybody about food. You will create, that resistance. You push up against somebody, they will push right back. But if you get out of the way, they can move forward. So there are insider tips for how to fight. You're fighting the food industry.
Yeah.
You are fighting the food. You're not fighting your kids. You're not fighting your spouse. You're not fighting your household members. You're not fighting other people. You are fighting the food industry, and you've got to fight with their tools. You've got to, this is their battlefield. They've dominated this battlefield. You've got to match them. You got to, okay, this is what they're doing. They're surrounding my children with cues. Okay, I'll surround my children with cues. Yeah. Just got to fight. It's a focused fight. Yeah.
It's interesting when you say about, don't fight with anybody about the food. And I was actually thinking back again about myself with a story is I remember in the 80s, my mom decided we were all going to be like the health food family, and she got rid of everything in the house. And here's where I used to joke about it, but I'm realizing this really was a sugar addiction. I remember taking money to school, and like the other kids were like my drug dealers. I'd be like, here, I'll give you money if you guys can get me candy. You would get me candy, and I would sneak it back home and have it hidden under my bed, and I would eat it. And I used to joke about that, and now I'm like, oh my God, no, that really is like a true thing.
Oh yeah. So in elementary school, a carton of milk cost 2 cents, and an ice cream bar cost 5 cents. So I told my mother that I wanted to have 2 cartons of milk. So she gave me 4 pennies every morning. Monday, I would put the 4 pennies in the back of my desk. And Tuesday, I would take the next 4 pennies and one of those pennies, and I would get an ice cream bar.
Yeah.
So lying and stealing, those are addict behaviors.
Wow.
Yeah. My very first memory is running out the door of my house because the ice cream truck was out on the street. And I was so little that I could take a flashlight and put it up against my palm, and it would glow on the other side. How little kids, the light just goes through their hands. So I ran out to this ice cream truck driver, and I said, look, I'm bleeding, I need an ice cream. My very first memory is of trying to manipulate an adult into giving me a dairy, sugar, caffeine combination.
That's amazing. And it's funny because I'm actually doing my my education reverse of you almost. I got my medical degree, and then I'm getting my MBA right now.
Oh, super.
And one of my classes, I just had to do a paper on the soda laws in the different countries. A lot of different countries are doing, they're taxing sugary drinks. It's interesting because the research has shown, and I'm sure you can comment on this, that taxing the sugary drinks has not cut consumption at all.
Oh, no, that's not true. It does. It does.
Oh, it does? Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'd have to look for the study. Oh gosh, I'm going to say it's a city in Minnesota. Could it be Minneapolis? Anyway, they are reaping, like they're going to balance their budget on the soda tax.
Oh.
It's very interesting. I'm going to go and look for that.
Or maybe it didn't cut consumption, but I think maybe it was more of they were expecting the health of their population to improve, and it didn't have any. It wasn't showing any effects on health as of yet.
Yes. Now that is entirely possible, because what addicts will do is they'll slide over. So, for example, what I knew about 24 years ago was sugars and flours. But now I know, like we were allowed to have artificial sweeteners and processed fats and dairy products and caffeine and soy products. And now I know that if you don't take out the dairy, for example, people will get off the sugars and flours and they'll just slide right over to dairy. And dairy is very mood altering. It's designed to put a baby cow to sleep. And it's designed to put 500 pounds on that baby cow in a year. And we do have really strong research from a wonderful researcher in Germany, a genetics researcher. His name is Bodo Melnick. I met him at a conference once. I just celebrity moment. Anyway, he's a geneticist, and he has shown that dairy turns on a weight gain gene. It turns on the prostate cancer gene, and it turns on the acne gene. So it's like the last thing that you want. And there are 4 different morphines, naturally occurring morphines, in that dairy milk that is designed to put a baby cow to sleep. Because you want that baby cow to nurse and then go to sleep so it will absorb the nutrients. And anybody who's nursed a baby knows that phrase, milk drunk.
Yeah.
The baby is just like, and it's because there are casomorphines in human breast milk too.
Oh my goodness.
It's incredibly toxic. Yeah, I might take a chance on a little bit of sugar being in my food, but I will not take a chance on a little bit of dairy being in my food. It's a real depressant, and the withdrawal, the dairy withdrawal, I only have myself and one other person, but for both of us, it took 10 days before we were back to being optimistic and clear-headed. So, yeah, just not a good idea, dairy. So now we do have a really clean food plan, and people, who have been in food addiction recovery off the sugars and flours for years are now getting new levels of control, results, optimism by eliminating the rest of the stuff, the soy and the dairy and the caffeine and the artificial sweeteners and the processed fats.
Talk about processed fats. I was in the store the other day, and, I grew up on margarine because margarine was supposed to be better for you than butter.
Mm-hmm.
But I laughed when I saw that they've renamed or repackaged the margarine. Now it's plant-based butter product.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, that sounds good. And I went and picked it up, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's margarine.
Yes. You see this, just think about how gross cigarettes are. They are so gross.
Yeah.
They smell bad. They taste horrible. They make you cough, and they're just disgusting. And yet, through the power of advertising, tobacco companies were able to persuade us that they were sexy. Lauren Bacall with the smoke wreathing around her head, sexy? Oh my God. And then they manipulated women starting with the suffragettes, and then hit them again during the women's lib era, that they were rebellious. If you smoked, you were rebelling. And then they did the same thing with processed foods. So they took the women's lib message and they said, It's old-fashioned to cook. Modern women use convenience foods. And I could just see my mother like, oh yeah, I'm not cooking anymore. I'm going to use, yeah. It's nasty.
Yeah.
It's really nasty how they are able to manipulate. Generally using shame. Generally they're using shame, which is a very, very powerful emotion. Oh, you're still cooking? Oh no, you're not a modern woman. It's just gross. And then other things. Oh, it takes too much time to cook. No, it doesn't take any more time than it does to wait in the fast food line. Or it's too expensive to eat healthy. Rice and beans are the cheapest thing on the planet and the healthiest thing. So just these absolute deceptions. Really, at this point, when you realize that the processed food industry spends about $10 billion a year with the media just in the US, you know if you're reading it in media, it's not true.
Yeah.
Like this whole thing about intermittent fasting now, why is that being promoted? Well, because it makes food addiction worse.
Oh.
Anytime the brain is like hypersensitive to famine, leading cause of death for all times on the planet. And anytime you're not eating, the brain is getting anxious. Where's the food? Where's the food? And that is ramping up the food-seeking part of the brain. It's also tragically ramping up this very, very primitive part of the brain. The most primitive part of the brain is eat whatever you find as fast as you can. That is what we call binge eating. But by not eating, by dieting all these years, we've now been dieting since really the late 1980s. So that's 90s, 10s, we're 30 years of dieting. That you see the primitive brain gaining control. So the primitive brain, which is very sensitive to not eating or not eating enough, it gets stimulated and stimulated and stimulated until it's hyperfiring to the point where it has control of the behavior center. Bingo, binge eating.
Wow, that explains so much. It's amazing. So all right, I guess I have a couple questions. If a person has these problems, where can they find your information or where can they get help?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. Okay, we've got a great Facebook group, 13,000 people in food addiction education. Facebook gets just slammed for so many things, but I'm so grateful to them because we are out there. I've got 4 people out there every day serving that population, people who are coming in desperate. It's like a field hospital. Food addiction education at Facebook. Our free website is Food Addiction Resources. There are like 20 some handouts there. They're all highly scientific. They came out of the textbook. While I was writing the textbook, I was creating these handouts because I couldn't wait. The science is there. Why does that textbook have 2,000 citations when nobody's ever heard of food addiction? Yeah. It's because all the research on obesity, eating disorders, and drug addiction are illustrating aspects of processed food addiction. So I have a full chapter on each one of those diagnostic criteria for alcoholism. I think the most, I have like 125 citations, the least would be maybe 25. It's because when you read the obesity literature, you see behaviors that are actually addiction behaviors. Okay, so that's another great free resource is Food Addiction Resources. I think a lot of your listeners, I'm going to hope on this, see that they want to get their mirror neurons on the right track, in a safe place. So we do have the Addiction Reset community, and you can explore the Addiction Reset community at this website, foodaddictionreset.com. foodaddictionreset.com is where you can sign up for the online community. It's so easy to use. It's got to be easy to use because the whole strategy is to pull in enough recovery messaging, enough recovery cueing that your recovery center in your brain is firing more strongly and has control of the behavior center than this craving center, which the rest, everywhere else you go in your life is going to be stimulated there until you can kind of work your household into getting the processed foods out of the house. Let me say one other thing about households, which is incredibly useful. The other adults in the household might rebel. It happens all the time. I need to have my stuff in the house. Okay, get a lockbox. If your brain knows that processed food is available, that alone is enough to stimulate those craving pathways until they just build up, and then you're not even in agreement, but your body has gotten up off the sofa from in front of the TV, and your body, like you're outside yourself watching your body walk into the kitchen and eat that stuff that you said you weren't going to eat. That is not fair. It's not fair for one person in the household to say, oh, I want my stuff right out on the kitchen counter, and have that kind of radiating out to the rest of the household members. Someday, Betsy, I have this really prestigious MBA. I really want to work with workplaces. The office pusher comes in and there's some ooey gooey thing out on the counter in the break room. Everybody else in the workplace has disturbed attention span.
Yeah.
Because the attention span is in the frontal lobe. Craving pathway knows that those drugs are out there. It's addicted, and it's just going to build and build and build constantly through the day and interfere with the ability to focus. This is attention deficit.
Oh, sure.
So yeah, those are four places to go. Food addiction education at Facebook, food addiction resources for the free handouts, food addiction reset for the online community, and then YouTube. So food addiction reset TV, do a search for that, or do a search for me, Joan Ifland, and watch those videos. I get a lot of education. A lot of people have come back to me and said, you got me started from the YouTube channel.
And what can we do to get your message out? Because this sounds like it's so incredibly important and
thank you.
Really is affecting so many of us and didn't even know about it.
You know what you could do, Betsy, to help me? Just in the last 6 months, so I got the ARC set up. It's working. We're working on retention, but we are getting our message out, gradually. So refer your patients, and you're welcome to do that. But what I started really delving into maybe 4 months ago is professional trainings. So how can health professionals talk to their patients about this? So I've done the first lesson. I would love for you to try it out and give me feedback. And it's on the tobacco addiction model. What's the model? How did we catch this? We caught this. It's not our childhood issues. It's not lack of willpower. It's not because we're immoral or we're lazy or we're weak. It's because the tobacco industry gave us this addiction. So how do you talk to patients about that? So that, how can you help me? How can you help get this word out? We've got to empower health professionals to talk to their patients about this. And, eventually I'll have a course on how a practitioner can build their own ARC. In the meanwhile, you are just so welcome to refer. I'm going to say this out loud. We're about to increase the price, but right now it's $12 a week. It's going up to $14 a week in 2020. People spend that much on junk food in a day easily at the vending machine or the coffee. Oh gosh, the spread of coffee places. We didn't even talk about that. So tell help me I'm a PhD, and I've got this prestigiously published textbook now. I can get in front of professional audiences and give a credible, responsible, well-documented presentation. So if you can think of conferences where I could speak or where I could apply to speak, that is another great way to reach health professionals. I now can teach how to build one of these ARCs. I have this great group of people who are helping to run the ARC. The treatment is there. Persuading somebody that this is not about eating less, it's not about losing weight, it's about recovering mental functioning. That's a trick. Like the first 3 courses, one is about the tobacco addiction model. The next one will be about the severity. Just how do you persuade a patient that not only do they have this addiction, but it's severe?
Yeah.
Because unless you persuade them on this issue of severity, they will not, I have just like I'm doing all these videos for people in the ARC to persuade them that they really do have to turn on that video chat, put their phone face down in the car so they're not distracted. Got to get that video chat on the way to work and take a break. Just work it out with their boss. I'm going to need 15 minutes to myself at this time of day, and to get that turned back on when they leave work, and then work it out with their family that in the evening they're going to get on that conference call. I need to do more work with that population on teaching them about severity, because otherwise the addiction is still there. You don't need to do that. You don't have this bad like the other people. You don't have to go to those meetings. So that module on severity is crucial. And then I'm going to have a whole separate module on what is the difference between dieting and recovery from processed food addiction. So that's like the orientation. Then we have 4 modules on implementation, 3 modules on special populations, children, the mentally ill, and then workplaces. So I'm excited to be empowering health professionals to talk about this in a way that will actually have the patient end up getting the depth of treatment that they need. The more severe the addiction, the more hours of recovery you need to counteract that really deep programming. Thank you for asking that.
That's
Betsy, I've done quite a few podcasts now. Nobody's ever asked me, how can I help? So really, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Because I just, the more I hear about this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, and how many people it's affecting, and I know it's affecting me. And so you're motivating me to take a look at what I'm doing and what my family's doing, and
yeah,
we're going to be making some changes.
I got to tell you, Betsy, when I got my kid, so I did not get them off of processed foods. I just got the processed foods out of the house and started giving them the clean foods that they asked for. Yeah. Whatever they circled on that list, that was in the house.
Yeah.
So I was being very responsive. I was paying attention to them. They knew they were still loved and I cared about them. If they circled raspberries and it was January and those raspberries cost $5, they were in the house. So I got to tell you, the payoff was unbelievable. So both of my kids went to college in very, very competitive years. It's like the second generation of the baby boom. They both got into top 10 schools. They both went to graduate school and they got into top 10 graduate schools. Medical school, business school, international studies. They both have 2 degrees. One's an MD, MBA, just like you. And the other one's an MA in International Studies in Arabic and an MBA from Wharton.
Wow.
And Camille went to University of Michigan. So the payoff for just keeping the processed foods out of the house and cooking clean foods and then talking about the benefits. So connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Like one day my 14-year-old got in the car She said, Mom, there was a pool party and there was these things at the pool party and I ate them and now I'm so irritable I can't stand myself. All I could say was, I'm so sorry that happened. But she knew, because she had seen how less irritable I was when I got off the sugar. That was their big motivation. Help Mom, we'll do anything we can. Mom was just nicer, less mean, less angry.
Yeah. I was just thinking yesterday, talking about the raging. I never connected the processed foods with the raging. But putting an IKEA piece of furniture together might cause anybody to lose their mind. But
that's an exception.
But the three of us, I got two daughters and myself, and we've been eating a lot of cookies and sweets over the holiday period. And the three of us were trying to put together a shelf. My husband was watching TV, but the three of us were putting together a shelf. And like the kids, I was blaming it on the fact that one of them was a preteen. She was so snippy with the other one, and then the other one was snippy back. And I'm just like, all right, you guys are all just preteens. And then I lost my, my cool too. And I go, gosh, I haven't done that in a long time. And I, putting all the things together, I was like, well, because I haven't eaten this amount of sugar in a long time that I've been doing over the last couple weeks. And I'm like, you know what? It all goes together. I'm like, I'm seeing it. So,
it's very sad.
Yeah.
It's very sad. I grew up with an older sister and a younger brother. We fought all the time.
Yeah.
And my children were the same way until we got onto this program. Just night and day. My husband, so PBS did a little program about our experience, PBS Houston, and they interviewed my husband about what it was like. And he mentioned that specifically, that the fighting in the household went way down. Fighting between him and me, us and the kids to kids, it all just went down.
Wow.
It is, to me, out of all these 24 years and all the things I've ever heard, that is the most valuable benefit. Just knowing where that irritability, depression, anxiety. I had done 10 years of therapy. I so wanted to be a cheerful person. And then bingo, really, within about 3 weeks. I remember I was standing in my kitchen just thinking, wow, nobody's needed to be yelled at in 3 weeks. I wonder if it has anything to do with the food. And fortunately, I was in a support group and I was able to go on Saturday and ask that question. 20 heads in the room. Like, yeah, we get less irritable.
Wow.
Dang, why doesn't everybody know this? Well, because processed food industry dominates media.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you.
Sharing all your wonderful, enlightening information.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this really deeply. And if you want to, at some point, we can do a follow-up specifically on children.
Yeah.
That's obviously very near and dear to my heart. There is a chapter in the textbook. I think it's the first academic chapter ever written on food-addicted children. So we can get into more strategies and maybe even record a program that parents could watch with their children. So just an idea.
No, that's a great idea. Well,
all right.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.